Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio, where we tell stories about the surprising ways that sewing impacts our lives. Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 34. Today we're talking about how to prioritize your sewing projects. So we're going to cover today what to do when your list of sewing projects feels a bit out of control. And we're going to get lots of tips directly from the Seamwork community today. So
Yeah, so this topic comes from a post in the Seamwork community from a few months ago. And there were so many great responses that we wanted to share them and discuss a little further. So here is a quote directly from the post. I have a queue that is out of hand, and I have all of the fabric for all of the things on it. I just cannot seem to stop starting new projects off the list or coming up with even more fabric/pattern combos to add. I'm wondering how everyone manages to prioritize what to make next. Oh, man. End quote.
the eternal struggle.
Yeah. Sari, do you have a system for prioritizing your sewing?
I kind of do.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is pretty simple. I have a Pinterest board that is like my sewing queue, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone through a lot of different variations. I think a lot of them work well, and it's just about finding, what appeals to you most. And for me, I found that I like having a Pinterest board because I can just throw inspiration pictures into the various like sub folders within the board. I don't know what Pinterest calls them. You can have like sub boards within a certain board in Pinterest. Mm-hmm. So if I have a project idea, I just create a subboard and then throw my inspiration into that. And that kind of acts as my sewing queue. And I try to pick projects off of that. And I like it. It's fun because I have all my inspiration right there. And when I'm, just browsing on either Pinterest or if I'm, just come across something that I really like the idea of or a detail that I think is really cool, I can just add it in there and then come back to it later.
Oh, yeah, that's I use Pinterest definitely for wardrobe planning, but not as a queue tool. That's really awesome.
Yeah, I think it's fun. I don't know. It's nice to I think simplifying everything into one place has been good for me because, I don't know, my systems can get a little out of hand and I have to pare them back.
Yeah, I like leaning into a tool that you already use because then you're going to be more likely to use it than creating this whole unique system. That's a great tip for people who are into Pinterest. Yeah, I don't really have a very formal way of organizing or prioritizing my sewing. I feel like what I tend to do is every few months, I pick like the 2 to 3 projects that I'm most interested in pursuing. And then I live in a really small house. Most of my sewing storage is out in the garage. I bring all of the notions and fabric in for those, and I put them in my little like sewing cubby so that way they're right there and available for me. And it makes it a little bit, everything else is like out of sight, out of mind. So it makes it a little bit easier for me to stay true to my original plan and make those projects.
Yeah, that's smart.
It works for me. I think I've tried more complicated things over the years, and this is like kind of like no pressure. And then after a few months, if I go back and I'm not feeling as inspired by an idea as I was when I first picked it out, then I might cycle some new things in. I like it. It works for me right now. Why do you think that prioritizing is so hard?
I think prioritizing is hard I think it's hard in every aspect of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I think we live in this world now where a lot of the problems that I think we have are problems of too much abundance and too much choice.
Mm-hmm.
It can be really paralyzing, and it can, I think, keep us from putting what's really important first. And I just think that's true in so many aspects of our lives. I think with sewing, and I think this is kind of an issue with all sort of material things, but I think like there's just so much out there that you could do. Like there's so much you could buy. There's so much great fabric. Mm-hmm. There's so many ideas, and we have so much access to it now with, the internet and social media. And like, there's just so much that I think it's a natural, like, human inclination to not to want to give up anything. And
Yeah.
so making a choice feels like giving up other things that you won't be able to do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel that in every part of my life.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that sometimes in that way of thinking, which I do the same thing, is we ignore the fact that by giving up, I'm using like air quotes right now, certain things, it allows us more room to more fully explore and enjoy the things that we do choose.
Hmm.
And I'd rather like experience joy and delight in less than like be overwhelmed by abundance.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the hardest thing is you really have to make those choices in order to, I think, even to fully express your creativity and find, what makes you happy and what
Mhm.
is true to you. That's, a lot of that is just making choices, and it's hard to do. And I mean, that's why creativity isn't always an easy thing to pursue.
Mhm.
That's why it's a journey over your whole life, really.
Definitely. Definitely. I want to dig into these juicy tips from the community so I can learn more.
Yeah, we got a bunch of, so the quote from the community that Haley read, that kind of kicked off this discussion, and there were a lot of great tips and ideas that people posted. So we wanted to share some of those and discuss them a little bit. This
Mhm.
is just kind of like a buffet of tips from the community. So you can choose what sounds good to you or what you think might work for you. There's just so many ways you could approach this. So the first one was to think about like some questions and to organize your queue by some questions you can ask yourself. So Carrie said she had a few things that her sewing queue is based on. She listed 4 questions. Number 1, what am I excited to make? Number 2, what do I have all the supplies for? Number 3, what do I actually need in my closet? And number 4, what color thread is in my serger? Which I think is so real.
I'm not gonna lie, I've totally chosen not just my serger. This is my level of laziness. What is actually threaded in my machine, or I already have wound bobbins for.
I know. I've been like, I'm just gonna sew things that are black or like black prints for a while, just so I don't have to change the thread. That's my
That's
next
always a
project.
good choice.
I think those are really good questions. And maybe you could have your own questions that you ask yourself. Like, it doesn't have to be the same as these, but I think listing those questions would be so helpful, because then you could I feel like it would help prevent going back and forth a lot. Like, okay, I'll just answer these questions and I'll do whatever comes out at the end of that.
Yeah, totally.
That was a good tip. And then the next tip we have here is to limit your work in progress. A lot of people have said that they just limit the number of projects that they have going on at one time.
Mhm.
And to me, I think this is a good rule just for life in general, is to limit the amount of stuff that you have in progress.
Uh-huh.
Focus more on a few things at one time and work on them a little bit more sequentially. Like, obviously we have to multitask in our lives, but
Yeah.
I find that the more I can focus on a few things, the better I feel emotionally. So
So
I think
what's your limit for sewing works in progress? I'm curious.
for me, I would say I very rarely would have more than 2 projects at
Mhm.
once. I often will cut out more than one thing at the same time. Like, for example, I made an Easton jacket recently and I cut out a second one at the same time because I'm
Mhm.
I'm already cutting and I have all the pieces there and everything. Haven't sewn that second one yet, but I rarely do more than that, because then it's too much for me. I can't think of that many things.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. Like, I actually rarely have 2 sewing projects going on at the same time. This isn't counting my mending pile. That's like a whole
Mhm.
different beast that's probably gonna grow legs and walk out the front door any day now.
Yeah. I'm the same. I mostly it's just one at a time, but
Mhm.
sometimes there'll be 2, but I don't really go above that very often.
Yeah.
And then I also have like knitting projects and all kinds of other stuff laying around that needs
Separate, though.
I can compartmentalize it in my mind, I guess.
And I can
Well,
enable that.
well, I work on it at different times, like
Yeah.
knit while I'm watching movies and whatever. So that was it. I think that's a really good tip, and just like limiting work in progress in sewing and in life is a
Mhm.
good idea. The next tip, this came from a lot of people also, is to pack away projects that you aren't working on and like just put them someplace where you can't see them and just to get them out of your mind. So if you're one of those people who tends to have a lot of progress or a lot of things in progress at the same time, maybe just try to focus on one by keeping the other ones separate and somewhere where you're not looking at them and thinking about them,
Mhm.
which I think that's a good tip. And also just like, I don't know, it's interesting the way the brain works, like if you have these other projects, but if you can't see them, it's somehow less stressful to you. It's
Oh, yeah, works for me.
yeah. It works for me when cleaning too. Just put it all in the closet and think about that later.
It's a problem for future Sari.
Yeah, exactly. I know it sounds funny, but it's true. Like you got to do what you got to do to keep yourself less stressed in your
Yeah. Uh-huh.
life. All right, and then the next one is to try a fabric buying hiatus. So if you feel like you're the kind of person who just keeps adding on more and more stuff and you keep just acquiring more fabric for these mythical projects for someday in the future, I am definitely guilty of this at times. Then maybe just say, okay, for the next month, 2 months, 3 months, I'm not going to buy any more fabric. I'm just going to use what I already have and work through that. And I think that makes it a lot easier to create a realistic queue to go through rather than like something that feels really endless.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting how many of these ideas are just about tricking yourself a little bit into not being so overwhelmed. But you know, that's life.
They're like mind hacks.
Yeah. Mind hacks. Sewing mind hacks. So I definitely have that problem. Like I have like this pile of fabric on my desk and it keeps growing because when I see something that just feels like, oh, that's so me, that's like exactly what I have been looking for, or it's just like too good to pass up. It
Mhm.
feels, I guess there's a little bit of like FOMO going on and
Yeah.
just keep adding to it. So I find that going through periods where I just, okay, I'm going to sew through my stash for a little while is
Mhm.
like, it feels very liberating at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of unintentionally go through like buying and non-buying phases and you can't have FOMO if you don't know the fabric exists. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Maybe don't open those email newsletters you get from your favorite fabric stores for a little while. I mean, do because you should support small businesses. So maybe not, but just maybe take a break. That's
yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. All right. The next tip is just to create a queue. So I mentioned the Pinterest queue that I have. It's more like it's not really a queue in that it has like projects 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's
Mhm.
more, just like a group of projects that I choose from when I sew. And that's one way to go about it.
Mhm.
But there are a variety of tools that you could use. One of the folks in the community said that they have a paper sewing planner and they use tabs to mark the priority order of the projects that they want to do.
Mhm.
That's a cool idea. That's a really easy thing to do with like just a binder or a planner, anything like that. Another person said that they use Google spreadsheets for that, and another person said they use Airtable, which if you're not familiar with Airtable, it's an app that you can basically use to organize various files and stuff. So there's so many different digital tools you could use, but also if you're more of an analog person, I tend to be. I guess I'm a little bit in between. I don't know. Are you
Mhm.
more like digital or analog when it comes to stuff like this?
I think that when it comes to like gathering inspiration and drawing and stuff, I tend towards more digital just because I find it easier to keep track of all of the things and organize. But when it comes to making a cue, once it goes out of like theoretical and into like this is something I'm going to make, it needs to be like more analog for it to be like concrete for me.
Yeah. I really like analog stuff because it forces me to make more choices. Whereas I
Mhm.
feel like with a lot of digital tools, you can just keep adding and adding and adding and adding. You don't have
Mhm.
like the physical constraints of space.
Yeah.
So that's why I like analog for a lot of things. But I agree with you that digital is a great place for just gathering stuff together
Mhm.
too. So whatever works for you, whatever makes sense for your process. But
Totally.
there's lots of stuff to experiment with. And then the next tip, this is a really great one, and this is kind of a long quote that I'm gonna read just because it's so good that I am just gonna put it in Tony's own words. So Tony shared this in the community. This is her advice, her system for using Ziploc bags for managing your projects. So she said, put everything, and I mean everything, for each project into a giant Ziploc bag. Add a slip of paper and write on it the fabric and how much of it, whether or not it has been pre-washed, recommended, and all the notions that are included. Sometimes those little suckers hide like buttons. Include the pattern too if you print it out, or just the title page if you don't. Then stick all the bags into a box slash shelf slash file cabinet slash insert preferred storage option. It takes a bit of time to put it all together, but it has unexpected payoffs. When you're ready to sew, you quote unquote shop your collection because everything for each pattern, for each project is included. You can get stuck in without delay. This is a great motivator. And because everything else is out of sight, out of mind, you don't get distracted. Another bonus is because everything is all together, you've started the journey instead of being stuck on the paralysis of analysis with deciding on fabrics or choosing a pattern. So I think that is a great system. That sounds really cool.
Yeah. I mean, this is like probably dream world if I was like ultimately organized. I would organize probably the majority of my stash this way. Yeah, it seems like a lot of work up front, but I can see the payoff of doing that for sure.
Yeah, I kind of want to try this now because I have some fabric that I've bought in the last few months that I know what I want to make with it. I have the pattern
Mhm.
already, but it's just kind of sitting around in piles and that makes it feel like a little bit more work to get into it and to
Mhm.
start it. So I think this is a really cool idea. I do use Ziplocs though. I do when I have things in progress, I
Mhm.
always stick them in Ziploc bags just to keep everything together. Some of those giant freezer bags.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was in design school, I used to use big, huge manila envelopes for things like this, and I would just use a glue stick to paste details on the front, like the flats, or maybe like an order of operations that I had been working on for a particular project. Because when you're drafting your own patterns, you don't get to follow someone else's nice and tidy instructions. You have to make up your own.
Yeah, I think that's a cool idea. I like the idea of pasting stuff on the front too. You could paste some inspiration images or if that gets you motivated or
Yeah, totally.
line drawings or whatever you wanted. That would be
Yeah.
cool.
And I would just reuse them and then recycle them when they got so beat up that, buttons were starting to fall out of the tattered corners.
Yeah. Well, we have one more tip from the community for you today for organizing your project queue, and that is to alternate challenging and simple projects. That's something I definitely do. I really try to work on something that's a little bit, well, I probably work on more simple projects than I do on challenging projects these days. But whenever I work on something challenging, I like to kind of have a little bit of a palate cleanser and work on something quick and easy, just a quick win, something fun and not too taxing after that.
Totally. Isn't that the where the idea of Seamwork was born?
Yeah, yeah, those kind of like simple, quick projects that you could do. We've added a lot more challenging projects since then.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved, but I definitely follow that same system for the most part. That I would say probably I do one challenging project for every like 2 to 3
Hmm.
easier projects, but asking yourself, like, am I ready for a challenge or do I need something like a little bit easier
Hmm.
just to keep my creativity going? Great question to ask yourself.
Yeah, it's actually making me think because I mentioned that Easton jacket that's just been sitting there for quite a long time. And the reason that I haven't worked on it is just because I want to explore some new techniques with it that I've never done before.
Hmm.
And and so that's kind of daunting. And because I have to sit down and like find some videos or a class and learn how to do them. What I want to do is some free motion quilting, which I've never done before. And so that is a little bit daunting to me. And so I haven't sewn in, several weeks because of that. So I think maybe it's time to work on an easy project just to kind of get the gears going again and then return to this when I feel like I'm ready for it.
Maybe you need something fun and like delightful to celebrate spring on its way.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea. By the time I get around to this jacket, maybe it'll be fall again.
That's okay.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm wearing my spring jacket today. I bought this jacket. So I got this jacket on eBay a year ago before the pandemic hit. And I have not worn it once. It's a linen blazer for those of you listening. And there's no reason to wear a blazer. So I haven't worn it for an entire year since I got it. So I was like, okay, well, today, you know what? I'm just gonna put it on because it's getting to be spring, and I'm just gonna celebrate spring with this jacket I bought for spring a year ago.
Feeling festive.
Yeah. All right, this is a little off topic, but those are our tips for you today to help you organize your sewing queue, and I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, really good tips. I'm just going to recap to review and really drive it home. So, first tip is organize your queue by questions. You can come up with your own set of questions, but Carrie recommends her 4 questions, which are: what am I excited to make? What do I have all the supplies for? What do I actually need in my closet? And the most important question of all, what color thread is in my serger? Tip number 2, limit your works in progress. Also, as we noted, a good rule for life. Tip number 3 is pack away projects that you aren't working on. So it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, help you focus a little bit more. Tip 4 is try a fabric buying hiatus. Tip 5 is make a queue. You can do this digitally or analog, whatever floats your boat. Tip number 6 is make project bags with Ziploc bags or manila envelopes and get all of your fabric, pattern, notions all in one place. And this will also, as a added bonus, will kind of remove the paralysis of getting everything together. You can just jump into your next project. And last but not least, try alternating challenging and simple projects so you don't get in a sewing rut. So yeah, those are all super great tips. And I feel inspired to go check out my stash and start thinking about my spring sewing queue. If you want to learn more about kind of prioritization techniques, we're going to have a really awesome episode coming up next week where we're going to share a technique for planning out your sewing projects in a really kind of lightweight, quick, and easy way. So definitely check back in next week for episode 35, where we're going to talk more about that technique. And of course, as always, if you like this episode, please leave us a review. It helps other people who like sewing to find us, and it also lets us know that good job, keep up the good work, and then we will do that.
Yeah. We need the motivation, just like anyone.
Yeah, for sure. We're only human.
All right, bye guys. We'll see you next week.
See ya.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the Seamwork community, and you can find us at seamwork.com. If you have a story to share, send us an email at podcast@seamwork.com. We'd especially love to hear stories from those whose experiences often get left out of the conversation, whether because of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, or any other reason. Again, that's podcast@seamwork.com. You can find us on Instagram at Seamwork and Seamwork Video on YouTube. We'd love to invite you to join us at seamwork.com. We have an amazing community there, as well as new sewing patterns and classes each month for members. Podcast listeners can get 50% off our unlimited membership, which gets you unlimited downloads from our library of over 150 wardrobe-building sewing patterns. Just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find that link in the show notes. And if you like this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other people to find the show so they can hear these stories too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with you soon. I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio.